Hey there and welcome back to another Pixar video. And today we're going to be talking about perhaps Pixar's biggest failure. A film that not only managed to do poorly for the studio, and poorly in a way that they'd never really seen before, but also managed to make zero impact and pretty much has been forgotten to time, which in my eyes at least, is probably the worst possible scenario for a film. That nobody cared when it came out, and nobody cares later on. Didn't succeed, and didn't retroactively become a cult classic. It just faded into the ether. Whew. And yeah, that's the fate of The Good Dinosaur. Released in 2015, The Good Dinosaur tells the story of Arlo, an apatosaurus who lives in an alternate world where the dinosaurs never went extinct. And apparently an alternate world where many species of dinosaurs that were not alive at the same time are somehow all existing together on a modern day Earth. And the dinosaurs, beyond becoming super intelligent, haven't really evolved physically much at all, which, yeah. I can already imagine that this would have been pretty hard to stomach for people interested in dinosaurs, or interested in science, or the history of the planet. But yeah, Arlo and his dad find a kid, a human kid, in one of their corn silos on their ranch, and after his father's killed off in typical Disney Pixar fashion during a flash flood, Arlo is swept away with the child, and goes on a quest to return home, where he confronts his biases regarding humans, and realizes that they aren't just stealing vermin like his father believed, but living, breathing people, that have emotions and thoughts and beliefs. And so, by the end of their journey, on which they battle giant snakes, fight pterodactyls, and travel with a family of Tyrannosaurus Rex ranchers, who are traveling with their longhorns and chase off cattle rustlers, they go their separate ways and return to their respective families with a newfound understanding of each other. And yeah, like I said, in terms of its actual reception, its reviews and stuff, it didn't do too badly. It was well liked. From a critical perspective, it has a 75% score on Rotten Tomatoes, which, yeah, whilst it might not be hitting the highs of some of Pixar's best works, it's still a very respectable score in my eyes. And the audience score sitting on 64% from 50,000 reviews, which, well, the score is on the lower side for Pixar, no doubt about that, and the number of reviews is also quite low. In my experience, Pixar's always able to hit like 250,000 plus reviews on Rotten Tomatoes for audience scores within a couple of years after the film's release. To me, the fact that this film was unable to do that is very telling. Anyway, the majority of the film's praise comes from its visuals, which, well, you know, they were honestly stunning, and no shit, because this is Pixar we're talking about. I can't think of a time where their visuals were ever disappointing. They might not always hold up when you look back on them like 20 years later sometimes, but for what they are in the modern day, when they first release, they push boundaries and they break new ground in terms of animation. It was a visual stunner, but at the same time, that was really all this film had. Pixar has two major pillars that they build their films around. A groundbreaking and advanced visual style, and a groundbreaking and diverse narrative style. They're famous for producing some of America's deepest and most advanced animated films from a narrative perspective. Films that resonate with both children and adults, and led to them being among the most critically acclaimed and financially successful American studios in history. Hell, scratch the American. Just most successful animated studio in history. And so, in all honesty, this storyline does not live up to that ideal. And don't get me wrong, it's not bad or anything, but at the same time, it doesn't achieve those lofty goals that Pixar sets out to attain. And it really did come out right around the time that I think the world was starting to flesh out that narrative that Pixar was the top dog studio that had the most emotional and developed stories and character arcs. This film didn't fit with that perception. And so I really think this did show up in its critical reception. But middling reviews aren't necessarily what's going to impact the film. Not necessarily going to label them as unsuccessful off the back of that, but rather the commercial reception, the box office impact. And this film had a budget between $175 million and $200 million. It's hard to pin down. And so realistically, if you factor in advertising costs and all that sort of stuff that they don't count as the budget, they'd probably need around $500 million to be considered successful. After all, that's what Brave got from a fairly similar budget, and Brave is considered low tier as far as Pixar films go. So that's what we're aiming for here. But yeah, it couldn't do that. It bombed. It bombed hard. It grossed $332 million, which, that's not good. It's so bad that it's considered Pixar's first ever box office bomb. A disaster. It made absolutely zero impact, which is very cringe, as they had every chance to succeed. Hell, dinosaur movies were back, baby! Jurassic World released earlier that year and grossed over $1 billion. Over $1 billion. And this thing couldn't even scramble together enough money to make back its budget and its advertising costs. Awkward. And I think it's largely this lack of box office success that led to it being entirely forgotten. So forgotten that I'd expect most people would have no idea what the movie's about, what it is, or that Pixar even made it. Whilst many of their other films, Older films that they've made are still wildly popular, even years after their release, still talked about. They've permeated pop culture in a way that this movie will never be able to do. And there's probably a couple reasons as to why this film failed financially, and we'll go through them a little. For one, it is kind of mediocre as far as Pixar films are concerned, let's be honest, and the plot just doesn't jump out at you. Even looking at the trailer, it just doesn't seem to be worth the trouble, you know what I mean? Like, why buy a ticket? And then just compound that lack of attraction with the fact that so many big name franchises were releasing at the exact same time. Mockingjay Part 2, going strong. Star Wars The Force Awakens was coming out and overlapped with the Good Dinosaur's release window. Peanuts had the Charlie Brown and Snoopy nostalgia. Alvin and the Chipmunks The Road Trip was there to provide some extra competition, and that was a sequel too. And of course there was Daddy's Home to round that out, and that did unexpectedly well. So basically, in Pixar's key demographics, there was some truly severe competition. And I think they should honestly just be glad that the MCU didn't have a holiday release. Otherwise, they would have been lost even further up shit creek without a paddle. And yeah, with that lineup, you'd have really needed a top tier movie in order to compete. A top tier film with a top tier trailer and a massive advertising budget. But this film just seemingly didn't have that. And thus, it ultimately failed to make any sort of real impact. Even worse than some Pixar films like Cars 2, which is hated for the most part, but did well financially and thus, people actually went to see it. It had staying power in people's minds. But here, we have The Good Dinosaur. A fun and cute little movie that didn't make really any money, which indicates that nobody saw it and thus, nobody remembers its existence. And, you know, it is kind of sad, but it's also really interesting. In years to come, this bad boy is going to be a trivia question on a game show or something like that. A really obscure answer that only film buffs are going to remember, or have even heard of before. And also, it's probably a much needed humbling experience for a studio that seemed to be bulletproof. And it goes to show that even Titan studios like Pixar are not immune to everything. And so yeah, that's been our look at The Good Dinosaur, Pixar's least successful film of all time. And so, with all that being said, that's the end of the video, and I would like to remind you that these are just my opinions, and now I'd like to hear yours. What do you think of The Good Dinosaur? You like it? Hate it? Do you think it deserved a little better than it got? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and let me know.